You seem to enjoy writing inside Michigan politics. You, I believe, enjoyed interviewing yourself. You enjoyed recreating yourself. In 2013, you decided to sell it. What prompted you after all those years to sell it? Was it partly because things were all going online and this was hard copy and the transition might have been difficult? Were you already thinking in 2013 that ultimately you wanted to pursue something which ended up being the Ballenger report?
I think it was everything you just said. I think the pace of technological change was becoming more and more alarming. I fought and resisted putting any part of inside Michigan politics online for years. I had people pleading with me, saying, you can't have this primitive blue paper, 4-page newsletter, hard copy forever. I mean, get with it. I mean, we're in the late, 1990s, and I still wasn't doing it. And so finally I decided, okay, I'm going to offer it online as well as hard copy. And so by the time 2013 came around, when I decided to sell it, I gave people a choice. You can get it hard copy, you can get it online, or you can get both. And I was offering at, the same price or whatever. Now there are various different ways you can market that and how you price it and so forth. I won't go into the details, but I could see that the way things were going, and I'm a solo person doing this. And I had no help. I had no staff. I mean, I could have hired somebody, but why would I do that? I wanted to keep all the money and revenue myself. So I just decided I've gotten to a point where it's too hard to do this indefinitely. I mean, I've done it for 27 years. There were times during that 27-year period when I thought, do I want to really keep doing this? And I mean, honestly, I had thoughts, even back when it was going really well after maybe 10 or 15 years, when I thought maybe I, want to get out or want to do something else or I want to change this in some major way, but I always resisted. Until finally in 2013, I decided, okay, that's enough. And there are other things I want to do and do it in a different way, and I can still continue to maybe write. And frankly, I haven't even gotten to first base as far as I'm concerned with the Ballenger report. I can make so much more of that. I'm doing a terrible job. But I'm lurching ahead, and I'm still trying to improve it, and I swear I'm going to get it to the point where it's what I want it to be.
Well, not only has the Ballenger report gotten, some traction, but also since selling the newsletter, since selling Inside Michigan Politics, you have also started a weekly podcast. Yep. And within the last 2 years, you now have a singleton, if you will, radio program, The Political Insider. What a perfect name for somebody who does know the inside of politics.
Yeah, it's a syndicated program on the Michigan Talk Network, and I was asked to do it, and I've done it for almost a year and a half, and the podcast, which is fun, and I never would have thought of the podcast except Dennis Deno, who was a local former legislative aide and pollster and political consultant, asked me, hey, would you like to do a podcast with me? And I said, well, I'm not even sure I know. I mean, I barely know what a podcast is, but whatever. And of course, obviously podcasts have become huge.
You're listening to the Friday Morning Podcast with hosts Bill Ballenger and Dennis Deno, discussing Michigan politics and political history. The Friday Morning Podcast has you covered.
Thank you, Jim Cotter, for that introduction. Bill Ballenger, the governor's got what she wanted. She has budgets. The Michigan House, Michigan Senate earlier this week passed 16 departmental budgets. She can veto them. She can line item veto them. What do you think about all this?
She could sign them.
She could also sign them, of course.
Actually, I'm busy all the time. I'm still going around giving talks to groups. I'm going to do one tomorrow. And I'm really doing pretty much the same thing I always did with the Inside Michigan Politics newsletter. I just don't have to meet a deadline every 2 weeks for a 4-page newsletter. And so I'm pretty pleased with where I am, but I can be doing a lot better and a lot more, and I intend to.
Bill, you're also one of the very few people to have been both a guest and a panelist on the public television program Off the Record. How far back do you go with that show?
You know, I was on it when I was a legislator. I remember that, a state senator in the early 70s. I think the program started in 1972. Tim Skubic deserves an incredible amount of credit for what he's been able to pull off. Can you imagine 47 straight years, 1 week after the other, never missing a week?
I'm not even 47.
I know. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Ask your parents.
I mean, it's unbelievable. And it's the longest running state-based televised political show in the entire country. There's no other state that has anything like it. And I was on it when I was a state senator in the early 70s. I remember I was on it when Governor Milliken appointed me Director of Licensing and Regulation in March of 1977. I went on it that spring. I've got the transcript of it then. Later, of course, I became a member of the panel of journalists on the program. Now, the 4 people that I can think of, out of thousands, Kyle, thousands of guests that Tim has had over 47 years. Think about it. He hasn't missed a week. In 47 years, he's had a guest almost every week. Sometimes he skips. He's had thousands of guests. Only 4 have served on both sides of the table. George Weeks, Bob Berg, Matt McLogan, and me. In other words, they were on it as guests, and they were on it as journalists. But only one of the 4 has gone in the direction I went, who started out as a public figure, an elected official, and went to be a journalist. The other 3 started out as journalists, Weeks, Berg, and McLogan, and became public officials. And so those are the 4 out of thousands.
What side is more fun?
Oh, I would say definitely journalists.
Being a panelist is more fun, I gotta imagine, yes.
Yeah, I mean, you're in the hot seat there. You just hope you don't screw up. Takes some courage to get on that program.
Yeah.
You can tell a lot of the guests are a little nervous when they get there and they make nervous jokes.
Being on Off the Record, having the radio program, the podcast, you have the opportunity to do something that you are exceptional at, interviewing people. And I would like to think that your ability to interview also was able to translate into your years of teaching. You've taught at several universities and colleges. How would you equate interviewing individuals and trying to get information to and from your students?
Yeah, honestly, I think the biggest challenge is trying to get information to students. Really getting them really to care and to really understand what you're trying to impart. I was a visiting professor in an endowed chair at Central Michigan University between 2003 and 2007, and I had some very interesting students in the class. Some of them have gone on to serve as legislative aides in the legislature. One of them became a state representative. Andrea LaFontaine, Republican, was one of my students. But you know what? It's really tough. Unless you're a total political junkie. A lot of students take these courses and they're just not as engaged as I would think they should be. And I feel a little frustrated trying to connect with them. I also felt, they had a little too much knowledge from the academic ivory tower about political science and not enough from the kind of information and knowledge that I held in high esteem, that I've described earlier as what is really going on in politics at the grassroots. Why are people being elected? What are the issues? What's the difference in public opinion? How do people comport themselves once they're elected to the legislature? I didn't feel there was enough. So I kind of spent a lot of my time teaching, trying to make the students realize how tough it was to get elected, what they had to do to get elected. And maybe that inspired somebody like Andrea Fontaine, because she was a human cyclone as a candidate. I never would have guessed it from the girl I knew in the classroom, but that is what she did. She outworked all her opponents. I think that was tougher than interviewing people on radio. I guess what? I love to interview people on the radio. That is the easiest thing to do in the world. You just ask people questions. You get them talking and get them to tell a story. And you know what? All this hostile journalism, gotcha stuff, blindsiding people, trying to embarrass people. Why? Why do that? There is so much stuff out there that should be coming from individuals that they should be glad to talk about, are eager to talk about. And anything I can do to get them to open up, and I mean, I try and make everybody feel, for instance, in my syndicated radio show, just completely relaxed. I mean, we do a lot of laughing. There's a lot of humor in politics, and more of that ought to come out in interviews, and it just doesn't. Everything is so grim and dour and intense and threatening, both at the national and state level. It doesn't have to be that way.
Bill, you have 2 children, if I'm correct.
Yes.
What piece of advice are you most proud of as far as extending to them about their future or their lives in general?
Boy, you know, that's a great question. I've got 2 very different children who are very close to each other personally, and yet they're really different. I've got a daughter who is ideologically, I would say, she likes to think a moderate. She works for the federal government. She works for the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, out of her home in Traverse City, even though the GAO is the auditing arm of Congress in Washington. She has to go down there once a month for about a week every month. Her husband is the superintendent of Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore. I didn't give her any advice about that. You know, he's a national park ranger. They met on their own in Washington, D.C. 2 decades ago. I think she's like me in the sense she was on the Michigan Daily, a newspaper. She liked journalism. That's what she does for the GAO right now. She is a writer, researcher, investigator for the GAO, the auditing arm of Congress. Now, I never, pushed her in that direction. I didn't know that's where she was going to end up. She worked as a journalist in South Africa for 3 years. She worked on an environmental newsletter in Washington for a couple of years before she got the job at the GAO. I would just say this, somehow, by osmosis, my interest in journalism and writing rubbed off on her, okay, without me consciously trying to direct her or teach her. Now, my son, get this, he is a history teacher, chairman of the history department at the King's Academy in Amman, Jordan, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. The King's Academy founded by the king. He went over there 3 years ago. And before that, 14 years, he was a history teacher at a private secondary school in Boca Raton, Florida called St. Andrews. He's a fanatic on the subject of history. He loves history. I love history. That rubbed off. He's much better on history than his sister. She's a great writer, researcher, investigator, but she's not really that into history. He's a fanatic. But he also is involved doing other things that I never would have dreamed of, except one thing. I walked through Michigan, right? He's ended up as being, this incredible bicyclist and hiker. He's hiked the entire Appalachian Trail. He's hiked the entire Pacific Rim Trail. He has pedaled coast to coast on a bike solo with everything on its back, from Maine to Oregon, and another time from Washington to Virginia. Okay? Now, Would I have ever done that? No. But he might not have ever walked through Michigan either. But there's some similarity. There's something genetic going on there. I don't know what it is, but there's some connection between the two, and yet they're both doing completely separate and different things.
You have such a busy schedule, even though you are at an age where a lot of people would consider, it's about time to retire. But you seem to have some wonderful balance in your life. What is it that keeps you balanced and maybe away from politics, away from writing? Do you have interests such as maybe sports or pets or hobbies?
Well, sports and pets, as you know well. I'm a sports fan, big sports fan. So I watch a lot of sports on TV. Pets, I really have always loved cats and dogs. I grew up with cats. Now we've got a dog, and we had a great dog before that, a Norwegian Elkhounds, greatest breed in the history of canine world. So pets and sports. But in terms of getting me to stop and retire, I mean, I don't even know what retirement means. I mean, I'm doing what I really like to do, and I just think I've got so much to offer still. I've got big enough ego to say, in politics, I'm going to make people listen to what I say, and if they want to pay me for it or hire me to come in and talk to them, I'll do that, and I'm still doing it.